Hi, I'm Rick Dior. Today we're going to start a pretty extensive series on rock drumming. The first book I ever worked on with my first legitimate teacher was a book called Realistic Rock. And this is what that book looked like. I still have it. This is a great book by Carmen Appice or Appice, depending if you're talking about him or his brother Vinny. Both great drummers. And I believe they're both still with us, which is a very good thing. So Realistic Rock is a very extensive book, and there's a new version out now that hopefully you can see this. Let me see if I can show you the cover. I have this on my tablet, but it looks like that. And I downloaded it. I paid for it, and which you should always do. So I have it on here. It's much easier to work with things on my tablet. I have everything in one spot. So we'll be referring to this book throughout this series, as well as my own book, which I use extensively as well for learning this style. Now, a lot of times people will say that rock is the easiest style to play in drumming. That's not true. The truth is there is no easy style to play in drumming at a high level. Now, on a basic level, playing rock drums is pretty simple. My mom used to come into the garage when I was a kid and sit down on my drums sometimes and just kind of do, you know. And I always got a chuckle out of that. But again, someone just basically who knew nothing about anything was able to pick up a pair of sticks and play a beat. And people can do that. So ironically, it's the easiest instrument to play on a basic level. It's the hardest instrument to play on a virtuoso level. Now, throughout this series, I'll be using a metronome. I use this Yamaha click station, just so you can hear where the time is. I recommend that everybody, when you're learning any style of music, use some sort of metronome so you make sure your time is steady. So we'll start with the basics, and by the basics I mean the different instruments here, the different parts of the drum set, and then we'll put it all together. So the hi-hat is what I usually start with teaching. Now, I'm going to play a lot of match grip in this series, but you also see me playing some traditional grip. I'll go back and forth. So the hi-hats I like to use for rock are 15-inch hi-hats. This is a set of 1960s A's. They're great cymbals. And they're really thick, but they're not annoying. That's why I like them. A lot of these really heavy, bright cymbals, a lot of the Pisces, which I have, but for general rock, you know, playing, for recording especially, they can be a little bit annoying. So I love the old A's. So I'll be using those. Then 2A crash cymbals. This is a crash ride. It's heavier. 18, and this is a lighter crash. And I like these because this has a bell, so I can use that to ride on. And then also this 22-inch old A from the 60s, which also has a good bell. Once again, a very high-pitched, heavy bell will get extremely annoying, especially when recording. So I like a lighter cymbal with a thinner bell. It's a little darker, a little less, you know, liable to draw attention to itself. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be using. And these Peavy Radio 1000 drums, which are my favorite recording rock drums, very deep toms. All right, and this is the setup I normally use for recording rock. I like the 2 low toms because they're very powerful. If you're doing any kind of that boogaloo tom stuff, these are great for that. So back to the hi-hat. There's 3 different ways I'm going to explain how to play this today. The first way is just with the shaft of the stick like this. The next way is with the tip of the stick, like this. And finally, we're going to use a shaft tip motion. So you need to play all the exercises from whatever book or exercise you're using like that. Those are the three sounds, depending on what kind of thing you're trying to emulate. Of course, if you're trying to emulate the Rolling Stones, you would do this. Charlie Watts didn't really double the snare drum with the hi-hat. When I saw him play the first time live, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That was his sound. But mostly, we're going to double that like this. So that's the hi-hat stuff with the right hand. Now, as far as the bass drum goes, you don't want to leave the beater in the head like this, because then that'll kind of ruin the sound of the bass drum. You want to get that beater off the head. All right, that's important, because if you leave it in the head, you got to take it out of the head. And again, it also kind of ruins the sound of the drum. Now, as far as the snare drum hits go, you can do rim shots like this, or just regular hits. For all intents and purposes, I would probably just practice with regular hits. And later on, you can work on the rim shots. That will give you a bigger, thicker, punchier sound. So let's get started. If you go to my book, page 188, you'll see these eighth notes and quarter note rhythms. I'll put them on the screen here. There's two ways to learn this kind of thing. All right? So this is very simple layered drumming, the simplest kind of drumming. You can use a book like Realistic Rock, where it's writing out the beats for you, shows you the hi-hat line, the bass drum line, the snare drum line, as you see here. Or you can take some rhythms and just kind of memorize that ostinato, which is this. And then play the rhythms with your bass drum. So that first line of page 188 is this. All right? Now, it's very important to remain really relaxed when you do this. You don't want to do this kind of thing with your arm. You just want your wrist to be very relaxed, but not this. And your whole upper body, super relaxed. A lot of times before you play, you can do what I call a reset, where you're just taking a deep breath and just putting your arms down. And then bring up your sticks and just play with that feeling of the relaxed shoulder. That is probably the most important thing when you're starting out to do that. Now, in the Realistic Rock book, let's go to page, in the new version, we'll go to page 10, I think it is. And the first thing in that book is this. And then the next one, number 2, switches it. Now, you can play this kind of stuff badly if things aren't lining up, if your sound isn't good. And so let's talk a little about balances. For this kind of genre, rock, basically the kick and the snare are big, huge. That's where your pocket is. The hi-hat is also kind of up there. So if we were going to have a visualization of the mix, it would be a big bass drum, a big snare drum, and a little bit of a smaller hi-hat. So right under that is the hi-hat. Okay, sometimes you can do accents, but the hi-hat shouldn't be like this. And what happens is, I hear a lot of drummers, sometimes jazz drummers, trying to play rock, and their hi-hat's too loud, and their snare drum's not loud enough, and their bass drum's definitely not loud enough, because they're used to doing all this comping. This is a different kind of mindset here, where the kick and the snare are huge. The next step, after you get that with the metronome, and one thing you can do is subdivide the metronome, so you could put on the eighth notes like that. We'll slow it down a little. 100's a good tempo, so we'll do that first line again. And you go through that whole page. Then you want to try the different hi-hat techniques. So the first one was this shaft on the hi-hat. The next one's going to be the tip. So pretty much the same thing. And then you're going to try the shaft tip, which is harder. So that ends up sounding almost like quarter notes. Which is a completely legitimate way of playing these things. Okay? Then you could also try a half open hi-hat like this. And that's kind of slushy, right? And you can also do that with the technique of just the shaft. So you've got to do all these different things because stylistically you will run into them. So once you have all that down, you want to start working with the hi-hat with the left foot. So I would suggest you play on the bell of the cymbal and you do eighth notes like this. And then the hi-hat can do upbeats like this. So there's three main hi-hat patterns you're going to use. You're going to use the upbeats like that, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you're going to use on all quarter notes like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then finally all eighth notes like this. So those three give you a lot of options. You could reach over, you can, splash the hi-hat for open on a 16th, lots of things. So those are the big three hi-hat rhythms. So that alone, doing that page, 188, and all those hi-hat rhythms, they're also in the book, obviously. That might take you a month to get all that down, but then you're well on your way to playing with this kind of coordination. So this is, again, very basic, eighth note and quarter note coordination. So let's go back to the Realistic Rock book now, and there's only so much of this I can put on the screen. Definitely suggest you get the book. And if you can do this stuff in my book from that page 188, you'll be pretty good until you get to around, let's say, page 13, where there's some different snare drum stuff. So here we have some doubling going on. again, doubling the snare and the kick and the hi-hat there, different layers, that's really important, coordination-wise, all right? And then Mr. Apsey has these little etudes. So the bottom of that page is a 12-bar etude. We'll play that for you a little bit quicker. 1, 2, 3. All right, so doing all those at different tempos, that was slow, but you can also do it very fast. Let's say we do it at 140, which is pretty fast. 1, 2, 3. So again, all tempos. And then you could do it on the ride and play the hi-hat on the upbeats. All right, so every possible combination you could think of. So that's the first section of his book. The next section, which he calls Part 4, starts dealing with some of these syncopations. So the first one being this. And so on. So these get a little more involved. The main thing here, when you start dealing with sixteenths, is that you do subdivisions on that metronome, like this. We'll slow it down back to 100. That was number 3, okay? The exercise here, I'll play that for you. At the bottom of that page 15. It's an 8-bar exercise in sixteenths, so here's how that would sound. And sometimes I put a little bit of bounce into the feel. You'll notice that the non-accented notes are ghosted. So you're still hearing that 2 and 4, but the snare drum's busy. As a result, it's funkier, all right? And then it gets more and more involved with the paradiddles. Let me see if I can play you the next exercise. That's on page 18, the next 12-bar exercise, and that sounds like this. We'll do it a little faster. Let's say 110. 1, 2, 3. Once again, evenness with that metronome, so you know where every possible 16th is. It's not going to make you into a robot. It's not going to make you sound like a machine. Okay, you're human. You can play with feel, but timing is everything. So we're going to stop there today. That's a lot of information. And again, those first 2 sections, part 3 and 4 really, of the Carbon Apiece book, or Appice book, and my page 188 will get you ready for the stuff that's going to come, which is the triplets. So like the Bonham kinds of triplets. And that calls for a lot of bass drum technique, which we'll talk about in the next video. So we'll see you soon.